"Step aside, you're nothing but a toy soldier in a costume." The police chief's order snapped across the plaza as two officers reached for their cuffs, closing in on the silent tomb guard. Ethan Walker didn't flinch, the rifle locked to his shoulder, his jaw set. Before the cuffs could clamp shut, a voice cut through like steel. "Touch him and you violate federal security protocol." An NCIS agent stepped forward, badge raised high, and the air shifted. This was no ceremonial pawn, but a man shielded by national directives. The chief's face burned red, his finger jabbing at Ethan. "Obstructing justice. You're just a dressed-up nobody," his voice boomed, drawing gasps from the Arlington crowd. Tourists whispered, phones filming, as two officers smirked, cuffs ready. Ethan stood rigid, M14 gleaming, his gloved hand tightening faintly. Veterans in faded caps gripped their canes, eyes blazing, but stayed silent. The NCIS agent, sharp in a Navy suit, stood firm. "Stand down. He's untouchable." The chief's sneer grew, the tension coiling like a spring. A young mother in the crowd, her toddler tugging at her hand, froze, her eyes wide with disbelief. She whispered to the man beside her, "They can't do that. Can they?" "Not to him." The man shook his head, his jaw tight, but neither moved, as if rooted by the weight of the moment. Ethan's gloved hand twitched, the faintest tremor, but his boots stayed planted, his gaze steady behind dark sunglasses. The chief's words hung in the air, sharp as a blade, and the crowd's silence felt like a held breath, waiting for what came next. The two officers, one wiry and young, the other older with a permanent scowl, smirked as they closed in, cuffs dangling. The crowd's murmurs grew, a mix of shock and curiosity. A few veterans, their caps faded from years of wear, stood at the edge, hands tightening on canes or jacket hems. Ethan didn't move, his boots rooted on the black mat, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. The NCIS agent, lean and sharp in a Navy suit, held his ground. "You don't touch a tomb guard. Federal orders, stand down." His tone was calm, but it carried a weight that made the younger officer hesitate, his cuffs pausing mid-air. A teenage boy in a baseball cap, standing near the front, nudged his friend, his voice loud enough to carry, "What's the big deal?" "He's just some guy marching in circles." His friend laughed, but the sound died when a nearby veteran, his face weathered and scarred, turned sharply, his eyes blazing. "That's not just some guy. Kid, show some respect." The boy shrank back, but the chief seized the moment, his voice booming. "Exactly, he's nobody. Just a prop in a fancy uniform." The crowd stirred, some nodding, others glaring, the divide growing sharper by the second. The chief wasn't having it. He laughed, a harsh barking sound that echoed off the marble. Federal orders for this guy. Look at him just marching back and forth like a wind-up doll. Worthless. A few tourists snickered, egged on by the chief's bravado. A teenage girl in a bright red hoodie whispered to her friend, "Is he really just a performer?" Her friend shrugged, filming with her phone. Ethan's gloved hand tightened on the rifle, the leather creaking faintly, but his face stayed stone still, betraying nothing. An older woman in a wheelchair, her hands folded over a folded flag in her lap, rolled closer to the mat. Her voice, though soft, cut through the noise. "You don't know what he carries. Shame on you." Her words landed like a slap, and the chief's eyes flicked to her, his sneer faltering for a moment. Ethan's head tilted slightly, acknowledging her without breaking protocol, his sunglasses catching the sun. The crowd felt it, the weight of her words. The quiet defiance in Ethan's stance, and the air grew heavier, charged with something unspoken. The chief stepped closer, his boots loud against the stone plaza. "You think that uniform makes you something special? You're nobody." The words stung, sharp and personal, like he'd sized Ethan up and found him wanting. The crowd shifted, some looking away, uncomfortable, others leaning in, hungry for the drama. A veteran in a worn leather jacket, his face etched with lines, stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "You don't talk about the tomb like that." The chief ignored him, his focus back on Ethan. "You're nothing. Step aside, or we'll make you." A man in a tailored suit, standing apart from the crowd, adjusted his cufflinks, his face smug. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, loud enough for those nearby to hear. A glorified marcher getting all this protection, a waste of taxpayer money. A few tourists nodded, but a young woman with a military ID lanyard spun around, her voice sharp. "You wouldn't last a day in his boots." The man scoffed, but his confidence wavered when Ethan's head turned slightly, his gaze locking on him through the sunglasses. The suit's smirk faded, and he stepped back, suddenly smaller. The NCIS agent's earpiece buzzed, and he tilted his head, listening. His eyes narrowed, and he spoke again, louder this time. "You're making a mistake. Chief, this man's clearance outranks your authority." The chief's face twisted, his cheeks reddening further. "Clearance? For a parade monkey, don't make me laugh." He waved at his officers, a sharp gesture. "Cuff him, now." The younger officer, eager to please, stepped right up to Ethan, the cuffs glinting as he reached for Ethan's wrist. The air felt thick, like it could snap at any moment. "Hey, if this story's grabbing you, take a second to open your phone, like this video. Drop a comment below, and hit subscribe to our channel. It means the world to keep these stories alive, to honor the ones who stand tall through the worst kind of fire. All right, let's keep going." The younger officer's hand hovered inches from Ethan's arm, but Ethan didn't budge. His rifle stayed locked to his shoulder, his posture perfect, almost inhumanly steady. The chief sneered, his voice rising to a shout. "You're just a ceremonial actor. No soldier, no hero, just a guy in a fancy suit." The words were meant to cut, and they did. A few in the crowd gasped, and the woman with the flag widow of a soldier. By the look of her, shook her head, her knuckles white around the flagpole. Ethan's head tilted slightly, just enough to catch the chief's eye, and something in that small movement made the officer pause. A groundskeeper, leaning on his broom at the edge of the plaza, watched in silence, his weathered hands gripping the handle tighter. He'd seen countless guards march, but Ethan's stillness in the face of the chief's rage was different. He muttered to himself, "That boy's seen worse than this." His words were lost in the crowd's noise, but his eyes never left Ethan, like he knew something the others didn't. Ethan's fingers adjusted slightly on the rifle, a movement so small it was almost invisible, but it spoke of control, of holding a line no one else could see. The chief turned to the crowd, playing to their attention. "Look at this guy, silent, stiff, acting like he's above us all. What's he guarding? A bunch of old bones." The crowd stirred, some muttering in agreement, others glaring at the chief. The woman in the wheelchair rolled closer, her voice trembling with fury. "Those bones are my husband's brothers. You spit on them. You spit on us all." The chief's sneer faltered, but he waved it off, his focus back on Ethan. The older officer pulled his cuffs with a metallic clink, stepping forward. "Move, or we'll move you." A teenage girl, her phone still recording, gasped as the officer's hand grazed Ethan's sleeve. "He didn't even flinch," she whispered to her dad, who stood beside her, his face hard. He was a retired Marine, his posture still rigid despite the years. He leaned down, his voice low. "That's not just training, kid. That's something else." Ethan's boots gleamed in the sun, unmoving, as if rooted to the earth. The crowd's tension was palpable now, a mix of awe and outrage, as the officer's hand lingered, daring Ethan to react. The NCIS agent spoke again, his voice like a blade. "You don't understand who you're dealing with. Chief, back off." But the chief was too far gone, his ego driving him. He nodded to the older officer, who grabbed Ethan's arm, his grip tight. Ethan's stance held, his body unyielding. Then, a flicker of red light danced across the chief's chest, another on the younger officer's shoulder. Laser dots, precise and deliberate, moving like predators' eyes. The NCIS agent's head snapped up, his hand on his earpiece. A voice crackled through, low and clipped, Overwatch ready. The chief froze, his eyes darting around, searching for the source. High above, on the roofline of a nearby building, shadows shifted, barely visible, but there, a woman in the crowd, her face pale, clutched her husband's arm. "Are those snipers?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Her husband. A man with a buzz cut and a Special Forces tattoo peeking from his sleeve nodded once, his eyes never leaving Ethan. Ethan's grip on his rifle tightened, not in fear, but in readiness, like he'd felt those lasers before, in places darker than this plaza. The crowd's whispers grew, a mix of fear and fascination, as the dots held steady. The younger officer, oblivious to the lasers, jabbed a finger into Ethan's chest. "What is this? You think you're still in the military? You're just a statue in uniform." His voice was loud, almost desperate, like he needed to prove Ethan was nothing. Ethan's shoulder didn't move under the jab, solid as steel. The crowd was restless now, veterans stepping closer, their faces hard. One, a burly man with a Gulf War patch, muttered, "Disgraceful." The chief barked, "Take him down." The older officer tightened his grip on Ethan's arm, but Ethan's body was a wall, unyielding. A low rumble cut through the tension tires on gravel. 3 black SUVs screeched to a stop near the plaza, doors flying open. 6 figures in dark tactical gear spilled out, moving with lethal precision. SEALs, real ones. Their boots hit the ground in unison, and they fanned out, forming a perimeter around Ethan. The lead SEAL, broad-shouldered with a shaved head, lowered his rifle slightly and spoke, his voice carrying absolute authority. "This guard falls under Joint Special Operations Command. You touch him, you're done." The chief's jaw dropped, his bravado crumbling as the crowd gasped. A young boy, no older than 8, slipped through the crowd, his small hand clutching a toy soldier. He stared at Ethan, eyes wide, then tugged at his father's sleeve. "Dad, is he like my toy but real?" His father, a man with a limp and a Bronze Star pin, knelt down, his voice soft. "He's more than real. Son, he's what heroes look like." Ethan's rifle shifted to the at-rest position, a subtle move that spoke louder than words. The crowd felt it, the shift from mockery to reverence, and phones raised higher, capturing every second. The lead SEAL stepped forward, his gaze sweeping the officers. "You're out of your depth, Chief. Walk away." The crowd was electric, phones raised, capturing every second. A teenage boy whispered to his dad, "Is this real?" The dad, a grizzled man with a Vietnam vet pin, nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on Ethan. The widow, her flag raised high, wiped her tears, her face fierce with pride. The chief, his face a mix of rage and disbelief, doubled down. "This is my jurisdiction. You Navy dogs don't run this city." His voice cracked, betraying his nerves. A woman in a business suit, standing near the NCIS agent, scoffed loudly. "This is absurd. All this fuss for a guy who just walks in circles?" Her voice carried, and a few tourists nodded, but a nearby veteran, his voice hoarse, snapped back, "Lee, that man's boots have seen more than your boardroom ever will." Ethan's head turned slightly, his sunglasses catching her reflection, and she faltered, her hand clutching her purse. The crowd's mood shifted again, the tension coiling tighter as the SEALs stood firm, their presence a silent warning. The younger officer chimed in, pointing at Ethan. "He's hiding behind you because he's weak." The crowd erupted, some shouting, "Respect the guard," while others booed the police. Ethan's neck turned slightly, his gaze settling on the chief. In a voice low and steady, he spoke for the first time. Weakness never held the line in Benghazi. The words landed like a bomb, silencing the plaza. The lead SEAL nodded, his voice cutting through the stunned quiet. He was embedded in Benghazi, 2012, codename Sentinel Actual. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A man in the back, his face half hidden by a ball cap, froze, his hand dropping the water bottle he'd been holding. "Benghazi," he whispered, his voice breaking. He'd been there too, years ago, and the name hit him like a punch. The chief's face paled, his hands clenching at his sides. He'd just challenged a man who'd faced hell and walked out standing. Ethan didn't elaborate, didn't need to. He adjusted his white gloves with a slow, deliberate tug, the motion as precise as his march. The SEALs lowered their visors, their presence a wall around him. The chief tried one last time, his voice desperate. "He's lying. He's just a guard in a costume, nothing more." He lunged forward, his hand reaching for Ethan's rifle. The crowd gasped, and the veteran in the leather jacket, his face wet with tears, fell to his knees, whispering, "Don't desecrate this ground." Ethan raised his rifle just enough to block the chief's hand, not striking, just holding the line. The SEALs moved in, their hands on their weapons, ready to end it. The NCIS agent stepped forward, holding up a red-stamped document. Classified clearance. This guard is a Tier 1 asset under Homeland Directive. A young woman, her camera slung around her neck, stepped forward, her voice shaking. "I'm a journalist. I want to know his name." The NCIS agent's eyes flicked to her, then to Ethan, who didn't react. The agent's voice was firm. "His name's not for you. His duty is." The crowd murmured, some nodding, others whispering Ethan's name like a secret. The journalist's face flushed, but she raised her camera, snapping a photo of Ethan's silhouette against the tomb. The click of her shutter felt like a salute, a quiet acknowledgement of his presence. The chief froze, his hand trembling as it fell. Ethan's head tilted, his voice like ice. "Arrest me, no. You stand down." The words weren't loud, but they carried a weight that made the chief step back, his face ashen. The crowd erupted, chanting "USA, USA" as the officers retreated, the younger one stumbling over his own feet. The SEALs held their formation, their eyes scanning the crowd. Ethan, unfazed, resumed his march, his steps steady on the black mat, the rifle locked to his shoulder like nothing had happened. The plaza buzzed with whispers as the police slunk away. The chief's head bowed. A tourist in a loud Hawaiian shirt who'd been filming turned to his friend, muttering, "That's going viral tonight." The widow approached the edge of the mat, her voice soft but clear. "Thank you, son." Ethan didn't turn, but his steps slowed for a moment, like he'd heard. The veteran stood taller, hands over their hearts, watching him march. A young girl, maybe 10, tugged at her mom's sleeve, pointing at Ethan. Is he a superhero? Her mom, eyes wet, nodded. The NCIS agent tucked the document into his jacket, his face unreadable. He glanced at the SEAL team leader, who gave a curt nod before the team melted back to the SUVs. The crowd was still reeling, some whispering Ethan's name like it carried weight. A folded letter slipped slightly from Ethan's pocket, caught by the breeze. It was old, frayed at the edges, the ink faded but still legible. The NCIS agent's eyes flicked toward it, his expression softening for a split second. Ethan tucked it back without breaking stride, but the crowd didn't see the name written on it, a brother in arms, lost years ago. A groundskeeper, his broom now still, leaned toward a colleague, his voice low. I heard his name before. Walker. They don't give that badge to just anyone. His colleague nodded, watching Ethan's precise steps. The crowd didn't know it. But Ethan was one of the youngest to earn the Tomb Guard identification badge, a fact that spread like wildfire among the veterans. His silence wasn't weakness, it was a choice, a discipline forged in fire. The groundskeeper's eyes softened, like he saw more than a guard, he saw a man carrying a promise. The chief and his officers were gone now, escorted off by security. Word spread fast by nightfall. The video of the chief's outburst was trending, his name dragged online. The younger officer, the one who'd jabbed Ethan, faced a review, his career teetering. It wasn't revenge, just reality catching up. Ethan didn't gloat or look back. His steps said enough, each one a testament to the duty he carried. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the tomb. Ethan's march didn't waver, his silence louder than any shout. A veteran in a wheelchair rolled closer, his hands trembling as he saluted. Ethan's eyes, still hidden, seemed to meet his for a moment, a silent acknowledgement. The widow lingered, her flag steady now, her face calm. Ethan's march continued, each step a vow renewed. A bugle sounded in the distance, its notes sharp and mournful. Ethan's shoulders squared a little tighter, his grip on the rifle firm. The sound wasn't just a signal. It was a memory nights in the desert, the weight of a promise to keep going. A young man in the crowd, a college kid with a backpack, lingered, his eyes fixed on Ethan. He'd been one of the loud ones earlier, laughing when the chief mocked Ethan's silence. Now, he stood still, his face pale, like he'd seen something he couldn't unsee. He whispered to his friend. I didn't know. His friend, still filming, shook his head. Nobody did. The video they'd shot was already spreading, the comments flooding with outrage at the chief. Pride for Ethan. It wasn't just a moment, it was a reckoning. The SEALs were gone now, their SUVs long vanished. The NCIS agent stayed a moment longer, his eyes on Ethan's back as he marched. He knew more than he'd said. Ethan's file wasn't just a record, it was a legend. Benghazi, 2012, a night of fire and chaos, where Ethan, barely 22, had held a position against impossible odds. The details were classified, but the scars were real. The agent's hand brushed his jacket, where the red-stamped document lay. He didn't need to read it again. He knew who Ethan was. A woman with a toddler on her hip approached the mat, her eyes red from crying. She whispered to her child, "That's what bravery looks like, baby." The toddler, clutching a small flag, waved it clumsily, his tiny hand mimicking a salute. Ethan's steps didn't falter, but his rifle tilted slightly, a subtle nod to the child's gesture. The crowd felt it, the connection between a man who'd seen war and a child who'd never know it. The woman's lips trembled, and she turned away, holding her son close. Ethan's boots clicked against the mat, the sound sharp in the growing dusk. A breeze stirred, catching the edge of his uniform, but he didn't waver. The tomb stood silent behind him, its marble glowing faintly under the fading light. The veteran in the wheelchair stayed, his salute steady. Ethan didn't acknowledge it, didn't need to. His march was the answer, each step a tribute to the unknown, the fallen, the ones he'd promised to honor. Yeah. A man in a faded army jacket, standing alone at the plaza's edge, pulled a worn photo from his pocket. It was old, creased, showing two young soldiers, one of them Ethan, years ago, before the tomb, before Benghazi. The man's hands shook as he looked at it, then at Ethan, his eyes wet. "You kept your word, kid," he whispered, too quiet for anyone to hear. Ethan's march continued, oblivious to the man's gaze, but the weight of that photo seemed to hang in the air, a silent testament to a bond unbroken. The chief's outburst had consequences beyond the plaza. By morning, his department was under scrutiny, his badge tarnished. The younger officer, the one who'd jabbed Ethan, was suspended, his name tied to the viral video. The older officer, quieter but complicit, faced questions about his conduct. It wasn't Ethan's doing. It was the weight of their actions catching up. He didn't need to speak for justice to find them. His silence, his march, his presence, they were enough. As night fell, Ethan's march continued. The plaza empty now except for a lone groundskeeper sweeping the edges. The bugle sounded again, its notes carrying across the cemetery. Ethan's grip on the rifle tightened, not from tension, but from resolve. He'd been mocked before, underestimated, dismissed as just a kid in a uniform, but he'd never broken, not in the desert, not here. His family had raised him to carry the weight, to let his actions speak, and they did. A young couple, lingering at the plaza's edge, watched Ethan in silence. The woman reached for her partner's hand, her voice barely a whisper. "He's carrying more than that rifle." Her partner nodded, his eyes fixed on Ethan's steady steps. They didn't know his story, but they felt it, the weight, the sacrifice, the unspoken promise. Ethan's march was more than ceremony. It was a vow kept, step by step and turn by turn. The stars were out now, the tomb glowing under soft lights. Ethan's steps echoed, steady and unbroken. The letter in his pocket, the promise it held, was still there, tucked close to his heart. He didn't need to read it to know what it said. He lived it every day, every step. The crowd, the chief, the SEALs, they were gone. But the duty remained. Ethan Walker, Sentinel Actual, kept walking, his silence louder than any words. To everyone watching, especially those who've been judged, silenced, or pushed aside for doing what's right, Ethan's story is yours. You're not wrong for standing tall, for keeping quiet when others scream. You're not alone in carrying the weight. His steps, his silence, they're proof that resilience doesn't need a loud voice. It just needs to keep going, one step at a time, through the fire and the noise. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally, healing.